50 odd countries that are helping Ukraine, and will have defeated them militarily on the battlefield. Like, we have sent practically every major weapon system, save for our most sophisticated air defense systems, which we sent to Israel, and the Russians are winning, and so that matters. One of the reasons why you don't get into wars is because you might lose them, and how we take the L in Ukraine is going to the world is watching. The world is watching what Putin did. The world is watching what Putin and Xi are doing.
You're watching Capital Cause, and my name is Danny. Today's guest is Doomberg. Doomberg, thanks for coming back on, my friend.
Danny, happy Thanksgiving. Great to be here. Hope you've enjoyed a good holiday.
Yeah, likewise. It is Black Friday at the time of this recording, and what better person to have on than yourself, Doomberg? So let's just dive right in. What is front and center for you right now? What is the top story in your headspace right now?
The top story in our headspace is the evolving situation in the war in Ukraine, the escalations that have been ongoing there, all of which is made all the more curious by the fact that we are in the middle of a presidential transition in the United States, and the outgoing president seems to be acting at odds with what incoming President Trump has at least signaled that he would like to do. And this conflict, of course, represents an existential threat to humanity, because it could, eventually escalate to a full-blown nuclear war. Lord, heaven help us that doesn't occur. But also, it's critically important for the energy markets as well, and so this is why we're keeping such a close eye on it.
Speaking of the energy markets, it seems it is a little bit unfazed. Oil is pretty much where it's always been for the last 4 weeks or more, at the upper $60 level. Nat gas, however, has been getting a bid lately. It has breached the $3 level, sitting at $3.22 in some other some other range around that value there. What do you make of both of those prices at the moment?
So you're correct to say that the oil market is not pricing in substantial geopolitical risk. It also is facing the consequences of OPEC's inability to bring production back online without destroying price. I think there's always the chance that there's a price war that breaks out, or OPEC's cohesion collapses, something we've been predicting for some time, which is why sort of the oil markets are balanced. So you have geopolitical risk, but also you have an abundance of relatively accessible supply that could come online at any time. Natural gas is a bit more interesting, as you say, and it's really a tale of two markets. It's the U.S. and then it's the global LNG trade, and both have perked up a bit. The latter, of course, impacted by the war in Ukraine. So we're seeing the Dutch TTF contract sniff $15 per million BTU, nowhere near its all-time highs of 100, but still 5 times what it costs natural gas in the U.S., which itself is catching a bid. We do believe and have written some thoughts in support of our belief that U.S. natural gas is set for a pretty bullish period. The oil to gas ratio keeps falling, and we expect it to continue to as the sort of AI demand drives incremental demand for natural gas.
What is the true scope of risk here for energy markets, especially with, as we head towards the waning last 60 days or so of the Biden administration? There appears to be a ramp up, like you said, in Ukraine to foster something there before they transition over to the Trump team. Will they actually manifest a war within that small time frame? Is something like that even possible?
Well, I mean, we're in a war. Let's start with that. If you read the Russian and Chinese propaganda and the Ukrainian propaganda, all sides are convinced that we're actively in the middle of World War III. We just haven't declared it over here. It doesn't mean that they're not behaving in that way over there. We listened with interest to Putin's recent comments about Trump. It seems as though Putin is aware of what's going on, and seems to be a little bit, patient is the wrong word, but has been saying kind things about Trump. So we just need to get to January 20th and then see whether Trump's rhetoric on how easy he thinks it will be to establish peace in the region marry up with reality that he confronts however modified it might be from today by Biden's most recent behavior or whoever is currently in control of the administration. I happen to not believe that Biden is fully checked in at the moment, which makes the situation all the more dangerous, of course. And it's really amazing that saying that is no longer even controversial. Broadly speaking, absent full nuclear exchange, the bias for oil prices is down. You have Drill Baby Drill coming. You have an outstanding selection for Secretary of Energy and Chris Wright. You have OPEC fraying at the seams. And we got plenty of this stuff all over the world. And just look at crack spreads for an indication that oil is overpriced. We're publishing a pro-tier presentation today with our good friend John J.J. Johnston of Market Vibe Substack. And it's an hour on trading energy, and he walks us through the market gauges he uses for the oil market and how he positions himself to trade it. And we're both in the camp that all things being equal, the bias towards oil is on the downside, and then the bias for U.S. natural gas is probably toward the upside.
Right. Now, what could an upcoming Trump administration actually change? If you look at his national security advisor, for example, Mike Waltz, he seems fairly hawkish on Ukraine. Do we see substantial change on the Ukraine front, despite some of the more hawkish elements in an upcoming Trump admin?
So it's a great question. I think Trump's ability to solve the problem, quote unquote, is probably more limited than his rhetoric would make one believe. That's a really tough problem. I think there's years and years of history on both sides that seem to be a barrier to a peaceful settlement. Much depends on what happens between now and January 20th, especially on the ground. I think we're starting to see signs of, at least in the Donbass, of a bit of a Ukrainian collapse. And the more land that Putin grabs before the 20th, the easier it'll be from his perspective, I suppose, to broker a peace deal. But his version of peace and NATO's version of peace are wildly different. It's hard to say what Trump's version of peace is because he hasn't spoken about it, which I think is wise. And all of the sort of reports we're seeing are from insiders or people close to the situation, and we all know what that means in the modern media, which you just should ignore it because until you hear it from Trump himself. I suspect we'll see a summit between Trump and Putin early on. I think, and so ultimately, if we don't get a deal, and we would be biased against the deal, that's not our base case that a deal will be struck. We think it'll be settled militarily soon enough. Russia just has such an enormous advantage in resource, manpower, logistics, and proximity to the battlefront compared to NATO trying to supply a proxy army from thousands of miles away. It was never, if it wasn't going to be over in a few weeks, it was never going to be ended favorably from the NATO perspective, in our view.
Is this just a game of chicken on the part of NATO, no pun intended, meaning that you did hear word from France and Britain that they would begin deploying troops on the ground should Trump renege on his Ukraine commitments, as well as Sweden handing out pamphlets to its citizenry to prepare for war. What do you make of those two developments? Is that just simply hot air just to scare the Russians?
I can't make any sense of it. I mean, if you just look numerically at the size of the army of the UK or France or Sweden and how much more sophisticated Russian forces have become. Look, the second strongest army in Europe today is Ukraine. I mean, they've been battling a very powerful army for the better part of 3 years now. And if the Ukrainian army is defeated in the field, there's not much in the way of, they have not been investing in the military. One of the big beefs of Trump is that, NATO isn't picking up its share of the bill. The UK is in no condition to fight Russia. France a little stronger, I suppose. I don't know what the end goal is. Do they think they're going to occupy Russia? That they'll just send their troops to Ukraine and Russia won't shoot at them? Do they want a nuclear war? I'm genuinely puzzled by the NATO strategy here. I don't have a sensible explanation for it. I just hope that they don't trigger World War III.
Gotcha. Well, let's shift over to the energy policy side of things when it comes to Trump. He did name his nominee for Secretary of Energy, and he seems to be fairly much in your camp, Doomberg. Some of the quotes that I've seen from him saying that energy is life, energy and productivity are intertwined, things of that nature. Have you done any? Do you have any insights on this new energy secretary at all?
Sure, his name is Chris Wright. He's the founder and CEO of currently the founder and CEO of Liberty Energy, a multi-billion-dollar shale services company, founded and exited other major shale companies in the past. Was a real pioneer in the development of U.S. shale gas in particular, and we know him reasonably well. We were, as well as you can know somebody that you've never met. We were once on a podcast together, and
Interesting.
very little in the way of disagreement. Yeah, if you just Google Doomberg Chris Wright, I think it'll come up. Very enjoyable fellow, from all reports, very decent man. And yeah, very indistinguishable in his energy views from us, which of course makes us very much biased towards liking him. We wrote a piece called In Praise of Chris Wright, a full-throated endorsement of the new Secretary of Energy nominee. We hope he gets passed through the Senate, gets confirmed, because he's got a full plate of opportunities to redirect U.S. energy policy and impact the arc of the U.S. economy for decades. There's all manner of things that he and Trump and the rest of Trump's Energy Council look set to do. These are, of course, bullish for production, bearish for price, and bearish for equities. I mean, I want to be very clear, except for the subset of those equities who are tied to production volumes, like services companies and land royalty companies and things like that. So, but he's a energy humanist, a practical person, a capitalist, and a man with an impressive track record of success at everything he's tried.
Interesting. So, what do you forecast out of his term? What do you see him doing?
So, I think we'll see the end of the LNG export ban. I think we're going to see a wave of construction of new LNG export terminals. This will be a fresh outlet for U.S. Natural gas, which of course is bullish for the price of that particular molecule. But at that same time, new outputs for natural gas free up the production of oil, especially in the Permian and other regions of the shale patch where oil and gas are co-produced together, and the inability to move the gas has been constraining the production of oil. I think it is bullish for oil production. I think we're going to see substantial flexibility in the granting of leases on federal lands. The new Secretary of Interior, whose name escapes me, as the governor of North Dakota.
Burgum?
Burgum, yeah, so that's right, Doug Burgum. He has promised to roll back this trick that Democrats do, which is they just, by executive fiat, expand national monuments, which effectively puts them off limits for oil and gas production. And who wants to allow drilling on the sites of monuments? So they just put millions and millions of acres off limits by calling them national monuments. Trump and team have vowed to roll that back. I think a complete overhaul of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, which is not under the direct purvey of the Department of Energy, but still is going to be very much influenced by it, is in the cards. Trump has been very pro-nuclear, bullish nuclear in his public comments. So I think we could take those. I think it's the end, frankly, it's the end of climate change narrative worldwide. I mean, there's going to be all kinds of echoes from over the next decade or two, but the air is out of the balloon. COP29 was a total flop. We called peak ESG at the end of COP28 last year, and I think we might have top-ticked it. Dirty secret, of course, is that almost nobody in industry actually believes climate change is a real threat or that we can do anything about it. They've been forced to fake it all this time, and now that they have been given permission to air their views, you're going to see a stampede to the exit. We're seeing DEI initiatives being rolled up on college campuses. It is a transformative moment. His election is a transformative moment. Whatever your views on these topics are, it's just undeniable that his impact is enormous already, and he hasn't even been sworn in yet.
Interesting. So it does seem like the pendulum's swinging back the other way. We have hit a lot of these peak initiatives. Where does the pendulum go, however? Do we, because obviously these kind of things, they tend to overcorrect. How do you see things playing out in a Trump admin as we begin to move the pendulum back the other side?
Boy, we went so far in the left direction that it's feels a little early to be worried about
Yeah.
an overcorrection. I'd be happy if we just reached some semblance of balance. We're working on a piece in Australia that we'll publish early next week. It's just crazy what's going on down there. So there are pockets of the world that will hold out, and it'll be interesting to see Germany and Australia and the UK. Um, it's be interesting to see as they continue to deindustrialize and basically impale their economies. While China and the US, basically China never really bought into the climate change stuff, and the US looks set to abandon it. The world is not going to alter the climate without China and the US, and China and the US are out. And so I think the pendulum will reach some form of normalcy, and then we'll see what happens in the next election.
Gotcha. When it comes to oil production, we did hit record oil production with the Biden admin. Do we still anticipate that number to grow even from record levels?
Yeah, the new incoming Treasury Secretary nominee, I believe, has a plan to grow, or he says a three-part plan. I think it was 3% deficits, 3% interest rates, and 3 million barrels of oil produced over what we're doing today. The I think it's real. I think Trump understands intuitively that energy is the last remaining sort of superpower the U.S. has. I think our military is frankly rife with corruption and not nearly as strong as we used to be compared to what's going on in China and Russia. Our best weapons don't measure up to Russia's best weapons. I mean, I think that's an uncontroversial statement. And we're running out of them. So energy, we are a global energy gigapower. We produce 20% of the world's oil. We produce almost 25 to 30% of the world's natural gas. We could produce way more than we do today. And we are a world leader in the technology to explore and develop such resources. And then finally, we're a world leader in AI and data centers, which is going to be the new home for much of the incremental natural gas that we produce. So all the pieces are in place for the U.S. to continue to dominate two really important sectors, AI and energy. And the convergence of those two will be the story of the Trump years.
Interesting. Does that appear to be the theme of the Trump year? Like, if you were to invest, if you were to create some sort of portfolio for the next 4 years, what would you put on the Trump theme column? And then conversely, what would you put as, what would be your bearish themes as well?
Yeah, well, I would be temporarily at least bullish natural gas and midstream players in particular, bearish big oil companies because they will drill themselves into poverty as they always do. We would be bullish any company that can enable the distributed electricity grid that we need to build alongside the existing one. In other words, we believe that AI must be disconnected from the grid. It cannot just be tacked onto the grid. Marginal pricing means that consumers would have to pay too much to make room for the Googles and the Microsofts and so on. We're very bullish. The AI as a technology. We've dug into it. We've embraced it. We use it. We have friends who are on the cutting edge of its development. It is as disruptive, if not more so, than the internet. But just like during the internet, we're seeing a bubble. So it might sound counterintuitive, but we're suspicious of NVIDIA and mildly bearish on the name. We think it has very little in the way of a defendable moat over the long term, especially as the Chinese ramp up their competitive products. They're not, they're outsourced completely to Taiwan, which is in a precarious geopolitical situation. And frankly, there's been lots of rumblings and whispers and rumors about their accounting, which nobody really pays attention to when the number goes up. But we shall see, what happens in the next year or two. It's not something we would short, because shorting is a quick way to lose money. But it's something that we're keeping a suspicious eye on. I think there's a lot of smoke around that name, and it's only a matter of time before we learn whether there's fire.
How much risk is priced into the oil markets, and as well as the energy markets in general, when it comes to Middle East risk? Is it overcompensating? Is it just about the right value? What do you say?
I think we've seen some positive developments in the Middle East. We saw the recent ceasefire in Lebanon, which, despite a few reports to the contrary, seems to be holding. Iran has publicly admitted that it has refrained from retaliating against Israel in part because Trump won the election, and I think Trump would like to see peace established in the Middle East as well, although his position on Iran is a bit complicated and nuanced, I suppose. So the market is not really pricing in significant risk of geopolitical war in the Middle East, although there's been some recent activity in Syria that is getting people a little bit interested. By and large, I mean, with all of the sort of headwinds facing the oil industry today, absent a full-blown war, we don't see much in the way of upside risk.
Interesting. What about gold and silver? Let me get your take on gold and silver. Do we see more headwind in the face of gold and silver with a Trump admin, or vice versa?
I think gold has been interesting to watch. You know, the U.S. dollar rallied so much after the Trump election that gold, you know, corrected a couple hundred points, but gold had gone up in a straight line for most of the year. It's still up relatively well and healthily for the year. We took a little off near the top. We're still quite long gold, but you know, the appreciation in gold and the amount that we had added to our position made it an uncomfortably large portion of our savings allocation. And so, you know, watching it here in the mid 2600s, it seems like a relatively balanced market. We are still bullish gold, biased towards the upside. The U.S. fiscal situation, we're pretty skeptical about what Musk and Vivek are going to be able to do on this so-called Doge initiative. I think it's much harder to cut spending at the federal level than anybody realizes. Hey, and look, and if they do, by the way, I mean, that's probably going to trigger a recession. One of the reasons why we've avoided one is we've had this fiscal splurge. And if you shut off that tap, well, it has to manifest somewhere in the economy, and you would think it would manifest in lower growth. So all things being equal, we're happy to own as much gold as we do now. And we're, you know, medium to long-term bullish on its prospects.
Interesting. So you don't see much of a chance when it comes to this new Doge department?
You know, you can't cut Social Security, can't really cut Medicare. You could get rid of some fraud. Everybody knows there's an enormous amount of fraud. I saw a quote somewhere where the total cost of all government employees is less than $1 trillion. Mm-hmm. Most of the expense has very little to do with employees. If they can take on the military-industrial complex, I think there's probably $250 million or $250 billion worth of waste there. So we'll see. I'm hopeful, but you know, firing a government employee is notoriously difficult, and we'll see. Like, it's not like he's going to have wide support for this in Congress. People could make the confusion, or people confuse the quote-unquote Republican sweep. You know, they technically control the Senate and the House. When you say things like that, you're making a base assumption that there are actually two parties that are distinguishable from each other in Washington. We happen to view them as a uniparty, DC-oriented, giant, corrupt blob. And there are a few sort of conservatives of the fiscal variety left, but they're a distinct minority. And as we've seen with some of the early stumbles of Trump's cabinet nominees, all it takes is a couple of senators. And look, Mitch McConnell is not on Team Trump. I mean, he's just not. And there are members of the House who are not on Team Trump. And I saw a fascinating stat, which is in 2021, not a single Democratic senator opposed a single Biden nominee to his cabinet. And here we are out of the gate, and the Republicans are already firing inward at the president that delivered them the Senate and helped them maintain control of the House. And so there isn't really a Republican Party, and the Uniparty controls Congress, and the Uniparty is not interested in shrinking government. If they were, they'd have shrunk it long ago.
Hey guys, quick pause. I won't take too much of your time, but if you're looking to add into your gold and silver stack, please consider Miles Franklin. More specifically, email them, info@milesfranklin.com, and tell them that Capital Cosmos sent you in the subject line to unlock special pricing that you won't find on the website. In the unlikely event that you don't like the prices, you could always not buy. There's no commitment necessary, but I do recommend Miles Franklin for a number of reasons. The customer support is top-notch, the prices are great, and I know the people there. Great people all around. So with all that said, let's get back to the video. Thanks, guys. Interesting. What do you make of this new Thune guy, the new Senate Majority Leader? Do you know anything about him?
Classic deep state uniparty neocon. Yeah, sure. I mean, there's a picture of him hugging Dick Cheney, at his ranch. Yeah, this was not, that was a very ominous development. Of course, Trump wanted Rick Scott from Florida, and the Senate said, no. And so he is a derivative of Mitch McConnell, maybe a little smoother with a bit of a squarer jaw, sort of a classic, American-looking senator, but indistinguishable from anybody who's been in D.C. as long as these people have are not going to be part of the solution.
Right. And then on the House side, the last time I checked, it was a 217 to 215 advantage due to the some of the cabinet appointments, taking some members off the bench there. What can you do with such a, I mean, obviously they're going to have a special election to fill up those seats, but with such a slim majority in Congress, what are the dangers there?
There's a bit of a scandal here, which is the 2020 census was not fully implemented, and if it had been, the Republicans would have had a much more comfortable majority. It's one of the things that Republicans are looking to correct. Yeah, I don't know how you manage 430 people with a two-seat advantage, because by definition it means two people can control the destiny. And the House is a bit more of a wild, wild west. They're only elected to 2 terms, unlike the Senate, which are elected to 6. And there's 4.3 times more of them, which means you have to, corral far more people. And there's just no track record of party discipline amongst the Republicans when they have thin majorities in the House. The Democrats are, Nancy Pelosi, for all of her flaws, got to give her credit. I mean, she ran a much tighter ship than the Republicans ever did. There was never any doubt that the Democrats would, vote with the party leadership, and so in a way, I guess the Republicans are more democratic. But with such a thin majority as this, nothing of significant controversy is going to get done. I think Trump will achieve most of the consequential things he achieves via executive action. I would not say, oh, the Republicans control the House and the Senate, therefore Trump's agenda is going to sail through. That's just not how it's going to work.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to a lesser degree, the majority in the Senate is also quite similar, although not as much as it is in the House, right? It's 53 to 47. Aside from, I'm thinking Romney, Murkowski, anyone else, Collins, anyone else that could potentially be a holdout that could kind of flip
Well, Romney's not going to be in the Senate anymore, I believe. But yeah, you have 4 senators who McConnell corralled to block Matt Gaetz' nomination to Attorney General. It's Collins, it's him, it's Murkowski from Alaska, and I forget who the 4th was. But yeah, there's a blocking minority in the Senate, and McConnell hates Trump. McConnell is not a fan of Trump. Like, you should think of Mitch McConnell as a Democrat. He just is.
Interesting. Well, the last Trump administration, we saw BRICS kind of go MIA. BRICS really came into fruition before the Trump administration, if I remember correctly. They disappeared for 4 years, and then post-Ukraine war, they popped back up again. How do you see BRICS, the BRICS alliance, how do you see their continuing growth in a Trump admin? Do they slow down? Do they continue as they are? What do you say?
I think they have been growing at a steady and measured pace, and that probably continues. I think it's far enough along, and more and more countries view the U.S. use of sanctions and weaponization of the dollar as a real risk and are hungry for an alternative, which is one of the reasons why we're still bullish gold. Trump is not a superhuman, and he's certainly a fascinating person, but we think 4 years from now, BRICS will be closer to its stated objectives than they are today.
I see. And then what about, I remember hearing an interview with Mike Pompeo, his strategy, before he was snubbed by Trump for I think he wanted to be in DOD, but he was snubbed. He was snubbed with Hexeth. His strategy was to make good with Russia and isolate Russia from China. And it does appear that may be the Trump strategy. How successful would something like that be if it does come into play? I mean, even if a Trump admin would be benevolent to Russia, I mean, it's only here for 4 years, right? I mean, you're really rolling the dice if you're Russia. What do you make of the Trump strategy if that is indeed the case?
I would characterize it as deeply naive. I think the relationship between Russia and China is so fully consummated and so fully intertwined, and there's such a lack of trust of the United States and such substantial growth in trust between each other that I think either side would be foolish to forego that relationship in the hopes of getting a temporary reprieve from the United States. I mean, not being a fatalist here, but the combination of Russia and China is stronger than the U.S. by far. Stronger combined commodities, stronger combined industrial base, stronger combined military, and both countries are ruled by people that have a firm grip and power and aren't worried about losing it. And so they're winning the war. Like we have spent hundreds of billions of dollars fighting a proxy war that we're going to lose. We've long worried about how NATO reacts to losing the war, but there's nobody talking about victory. And if NATO does lose the war, as it looks like it is and will, that's going to be a calamity for NATO's reputation, Trump or no Trump. Russia will have stared down the 50-odd countries that are helping Ukraine and will have defeated them militarily on the battlefield. Like, we have sent practically every major weapon system, save for our most sophisticated air defense systems, which we sent to Israel, and the Russians are winning. And so that matters. One of the reasons why you don't get into wars is because you might lose them. And how we take the L in Ukraine is going to, the world is watching. The world is watching what Putin did. The world is watching what Putin and Xi are doing. And I think that the strategy of convincing Putin to turn on Xi is deeply naive.
Will this recent Syria escalation play into the Ukraine-Russia war at all? There is connectivity between Russia and Syria and Ukraine, it seems. Will this affect the outcome any which way?
I find it surprising, of course, because the forces battling the pro-Russian forces are supported by Turkey, but at the same time, Turkey and Russia are cutting deals on natural gas. I think, and by the way, sometimes proxies can't be controlled and stuff happens beyond your ability to manage. And so we would fade that as a huge development. Erdogan and Putin just spoke by phone, a week ago. We wrote a piece about how Turkey is trying to position itself as the future natural gas hub. It's connected to Russia via two large pipelines undersea, and then that gas is blended with all of its other imports and local production and sent on to countries like Italy and Hungary and Serbia and Greece. And so Erdogan's kind of in the catbird seat. He may have ambitions in Syria that conflict with his financial ones, but in the long run, I think the financial forces will prevail.
Interesting. What about the broad market in general? The broad market seems to have rallied and making new all-time highs with the advent of the Trump win. Why is the market rallying the way it is? And then what's going on there with crypto? Bitcoin is also tracking new all-time highs as well as the rest of the crypto complex. What's the story there?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because if Doge is successful, that's bearish for the economy, as crazy as that sounds. And by the way, the long bond is not pricing in much of the way of success either. And then on top of
hold on. You said if Doge is successful, it's bearish for the economy, or
yeah. Well, if you run strong fiscal surpluses, the economy grows. What happens if you do the opposite?
Okay.
Right. I mean, like, government spending is bullish for GDP. Government cutting is bearish for GDP. It's you're holding a coin. It's the other side of it. And I don't think they're going to be successful, like I said earlier. And if you look at interest rates on the long end, they're rising. So what I think we're seeing with Bitcoin and the bubble in stocks is the sort of fiscal situation in the U.S. Printing more money, Fed balance sheet eventually having to expand. We're cutting rates into still a pretty inflationary environment. I think Bitcoin is pricing that in, but also the Wall Streetification of Bitcoin is real. There's a huge amount of what amounts to passive money flowing into these new ETFs, and now you can buy options on those ETFs. Like the people getting the richest off of the Bitcoin trend, aside from the Bitcoin whales, is Wall Street itself, because it has become just another asset class that it can monetize as people get excited about it. So I think, and then Trump has embraced it. I think, this was a tight election, and in basically came down to tens of thousands of people in 7 states, right? Embracing Bitcoin is embracing a relatively small but very passionate minority of people who were very likely to turn out and could have been one of the reasons why Trump won the nomination. And so it is a chart that we watch. I enjoy observing and covering the Bitcoin space, and I'm not surprised by the recent price action once it was clear that Trump was going to win. But like everything else, it was just, you could stay at the dance party, just dance close to the exits. That would be our advice.
Do we see Bitcoin adoption at the BRICS level as well? Just recently, Putin came out and said that Bitcoin will be legal property in Russia. Do we also see that happening on a sovereign level as well as Trump, Trump's policy to start a Bitcoin reserve comes into play? Do we see other countries follow suit?
Yeah, it could be. I think there's more interest amongst the BRICS countries in developing central bank digital currencies at the central bank level, not for use in society, but as a means to settle imbalances in international trade outside of the purview of the US dollar system. And how that is constructed and managed remains to be seen. I doubt it would involve Bitcoin because the volatility of Bitcoin just makes it incompatible for such purposes. But such a development would be bullish for the whole space. I mean, we're at the point where anything bullish crypto is bullish Bitcoin, and vice versa. We note with interest that the FTX creditors are getting paid back in full. I'm old enough to remember when claims against the FTX bankruptcy estate were selling for 10 to 15 cents on the dollar. People who swept those up came out pretty well. Such is life. It must be amazing for Bankman-Fried to be sitting in federal prison for the next couple of decades to watch what happened with his whole empire. And so, it doesn't hurt Bitcoin if it's legal property in Russia. What happened in El Salvador doesn't hurt Bitcoin. We'll see what happens in Argentina. And look, for many people in the developing world, Bitcoin is a fantastic thing. It's a store of value that is that can be hidden from authorities and serves a really valuable purpose. And so good for them.
Interesting. So what is the strategy here with a strategic reserve for Bitcoin? Have Trump and RFK alluded to?
I have no idea. I don't know why the U.S. would need one. It has a printing press. It doesn't seem shy to use it. But again, if I would view such comments as Trump paying back an important constituency that helped him win the election. Again, people think that the U.S. election is decided by millions and millions of votes. It really does just come down to swinging 40,000 people in Pennsylvania and 30,000 people in Michigan and 100,000 people in Georgia, Nevada, Arizona. That's pretty much it, right? I mean, it doesn't take much to go from win to loss, and every bit counts. Trump was taking the endorsement of the Arab community in Michigan, tried to thread the needle on the Israel war in Gaza and so on. Again, all of those are very shrewd moves because he, having, by the way, accumulated more votes for president than any other human in history, which is a fascinating number.
Oh, he passed the 81 million number?
I think he had, no, total, 3 elections.
Oh, okay.
Right? And so he's garnered the most votes of any presidential candidate in history. I believe he's even passed FDR.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
And so, he's gotten wise to the game. And so, by the way, the RFK Jr. endorsement probably won Trump the election.
You think so?
Yeah, look.
You think he had that much influence?
A point or two, yeah, sure. I mean, the final popular vote is Trump, what, plus 1.6?
Right.
Um,
Which is huge for a Republican.
it is, especially,
The map.
the popular vote is a bit deceptive, as Trump correctly says. If popular vote decided president, he'd have spent all his time in California and New York, and would have those vote tallies would have been substantially different. But it's still a data point and an important one. I think it's, given our system, probably overemphasized. But yeah, of course, 2% in the swing states is the difference between winning and losing, and RFK undoubtedly had at least that big of an impact.
Interesting. Well, hey, Doomberg, it's been a pleasure having you on. Anything else you want to talk about before we wrap things up?
No, I hope you have a wonderful rest of the holiday weekend. Always great to talk to you, Danny. Doomberg.com is where you can find all of our stuff. Having a blast producing it. Always great to talk to you and looking forward to the next time.
Excellent. Link to that is down below, guys, so be sure to check it out. Also, like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. If you got value out of this video, comment down below. Go Doomberg, go. If you disagreed with anything, however, let me know in the comment section. I do read the comments, so I'm interested to get your take here, guys. I don't have time to reply to each and every one of them, but I do indeed read them, so drop them down below. Also, check out our Substack for early access as well as ad-free and uncensored versions of these interviews that you won't find here on YouTube. Click the link down below, capitalcosm.substack.com, and I'll catch you in the next episode. Bye, guys.